Thank you, Ajahn Sona, for meeting with me. I've asked Ajahn Sona 4 times, and every single time he said yes, but I asked if he would do an interview with me, specifically asking questions about the Sierra project, the trip that Blake and I now are going to be taking down to the Sierras basically July 1st through the end of August. Plans got changed slightly, but it looks like we're back on track. And when I originally was thinking of this, it was going to be a monastic, sort of interreligious dialogue. That was part of the desire for the trip, but that's kind of hasn't materialized. And what I wanted to do was to show the other monastics a bit of your Kasina retreat, the Kasina and the elements.
Yes.
And see if they had teachings in their own traditions about the kind of same thing, and just have a dialogue about that. And then when we were out in the mountains to, practice with those, like we do practicing with them here. And I just wanted to get your advice and suggestions for either doing that, or we were mentioning earlier, it's like part of also being on an extended trip in the mountains is community. The person you're with, yourself, and the other person you're hiking with, and the people you're encountering in the mountains. It's not just a solitary meditation retreat. So I'll open that up if you have anything to talk about.
Well, there's a good reason the Buddha advocated going to the forest. Monks go to the forest, stay in the forest, practice in the forest. And of course, the Buddha himself remained in the forest. He didn't go back to the palace. It's every tradition, contemplative tradition, has a lot of respect for nature and the processes that can happen when you're out of the over-structured human city, urban area, where everywhere you turn you just see the marks of humanity. When you enter into the forest, you're in an environment that is millions of years old. These pine trees around here, spruce trees and pine trees, haven't changed for millions of years. Mountains, rocks haven't changed for billions of years. The sky hasn't changed for billions of years. And this is the primordial elements of nature, and we merge with them because our mind is formed with that. As humans advanced and they moved out of harmony with nature, if they moved out of the small hunting tribes, rural communities, then things get more and more sophisticated, and you lose touch with this primary contact with the elements. And these elements are something that every culture recognizes. They all have words for the solid, like the stone, the earth, the sky, the air, the water, the fire. And even before they controlled fire, they had the sun in the sky. And of course, every cat knows where to find the sun, patch of sunlight, Every being is related to the sun, the central fire. So this is very primordial, and there's a lot of restorative space in consciousness that you can recover just by being in the elements. Of course, not everybody's going to be comfortable out there. If you've been raised in an urban environment and never been out there, you may not respond that well. But if you're inclined to go out into nature, then you become more and more comfortable and at home there, and it does half the work for you, basically. You still have to know some Dhamma. You have to reflect on the greater things, but nature, in terms of serenity and clarifying excess thoughts that have to do with complexities of human civilization, that can fall away, and then you have a chance to get the big picture of life. in the midst of this serenity. So half the work is done just in nature amongst these primary elements.
Now, this winter I was, went back and re-listened to the Casina retreat, which I can leave a link for that in the bottom of the description of the video if anybody's interested. And there they were very specific meditations, of making objects or sitting with objects. Do you have any advice about how to do that? Because like Yosemite in particular, and the Sequoia National Park, where we'll be, it's huge granite is kind of what it's known for.
Yeah.
But there's also most of the places we're going to be going to have big lakes and just big blue sky. And
well, I think the making of Casina is like, what you're doing is extracting the essence of each of the elements so that you can practice in any environment. So, water, you can capture a bowl of water, or earth, you can always get a small sample of earth. Fire, of course, a candle or something like that, but it's not necessary. Those are little refined, transportable things that you can take with you, and you can even bring them into urban environments. You can do it in a glass and steel condo in the 17th floor. You can contemplate water or earth and so forth, but there's nothing like the real thing, especially in mass. Like Yosemite is going to have overwhelming mass. It's going to be playing on your consciousness all the time, the immensity of those granite structures. It's going to be entering it into your consciousness. You're going to be abiding in it. You can feel the immensity of it. Each of these elements are appealing to certain types. I mean, some people will respond to every element. Some people love the ocean and they love the mountains, and they love the sky, the wind. They love to sail, the experience of sailing in the wind. They love to sit around a fire, all of the elements. But some of the elements appeal to some people particularly. They just must live by the sea or by the river. Some people are a little enclosed by the mountains. They feel they want to live on the prairie or the flat surface, Each situation has its benefits as well. Like to camp in a narrow valley has benefits. If you're kind of a discursive type that wanders around, wants to see everything, then it cuts that off. So you feel like you don't have to do that. You're contained within that valley. Mm-hmm. The Shack Monastery was at the bottom of a valley, 8,000-foot mountains on both sides. You were contained. And there was a river that ran at the bottom of that as well, right near the door of the monastery. So the constant sound of that river, I spent 6.5 years beside that river. There's never a split second when you don't hear that river, except maybe in winter when it freezes over. But it is very conducive. That containment is very conducive. The immensity of the mountains is something that does something to you, It contains the mind, and you can reflect with that. That's typically these are, in all the traditions, they're nature mystics. If you read the biography of Venerable Keating, the abbot of one of the Trappist monasteries,
Thomas Keating.
I actually met him. I did a little retreat with him where four of us spoke from each of our traditions on a 2-day, 3-day kind of retreat in the forest in this big Catholic church. And so he was 84 when I met him, and that was 15 years ago, I guess. And he was a nature mystic. That's where he got his contemplative practice from. He just felt, kind of ecstatic and well in nature. But he was in a search also to restore the contemplative practice, and I think it's because he responded to nature that he knew that there is another way of being, that maybe some of the Catholic churches and so forth had lost in the last 3 or 4 centuries, and he was searching to recover these practices, how to get back to that. But there are naturals, there are nature naturals who pick it up on their own. Thoreau or somebody like this would be he's a nature mystic. He's one who manages to dwell with very little stimulation in nature and has ecstatic moments. So he spends a lot of time on Walden Pond, just drifting around in a rowboat or canoe and looking into the pond, measuring the pond, playing a little flute while he drifts around in his boat, sitting on a stump outside his cottage in the forest as well. So he's a natural, and by the way, so this is something that appears rather obscure to most people, but it's one of his account of his view of reality from the forest is one of the most influential books written in the U.S. in U.S. history. And this goes right back to the time of Socrates, the Greeks. They wondered if a civilization couldn't go back to the simplicity. They knew maybe it was beyond turning it back, but there was a longing even then for going back to the basics of nature. And you'll see all kinds of people. They move way off the grid into the nature. And it occurs to certain individuals. It's in their nature. Others are urban. They don't understand it. They need a lot of social interaction and complexity. But this is how you get back through the primarily being with the elements. Yeah.
The name of my channel is because of Thoreau. He has an essay on walking.
Right.
And then he talks about sauntering.
Yeah.
And the reason I kind of picked that name was because he describes when he used to go sauntering. Yeah, and I realized I was doing the same thing right here, which is he said I would set out the door and I'd be thinking, I'm going to go to the north. And he said, but I'd be walking, I'd see a cow trail, I'd see a spider web, and he would just let whatever happened just take him.
Yes.
And I do that all the time here. It's like, I've probably explored not every, but, just be walking along thinking I'm going to go to the marsh, and then I end up completely opposite direction.
Yeah, you've pretty well covered this territory like no other person on the planet has. And there's lots of places where you can go 200 feet in the woods and there's no human has ever set foot there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. We're between two Indian tribes, so 30 kilometers north of us is the Kamloops tribe, and then the Merritt tribe is 30, 40 kilometers south of us. So they would have very rarely, if ever, have been up here. They didn't need to come up here for hunting or anything like this. So this plateau here was never much for anybody to dwell here. Logging has taken place, but the loggers just stay in their machine and cut the trees down and then go away.
Right.
But there's lots of places here where nobody has walked. No human has walked.
Right. So when you were talking about Thomas Keating and coming back to sort of rediscovering or using mystic practices, what I kind of get from what you're saying is like, so what I was thinking of doing was like, before we go out on each of the hikes, we're going to be doing, I think, 5 hikes, 5 separate trips, like, play one of the videos and, watch it before we go, which, might be on, if it's, one of the elements, say, and then maybe trying to focus on that while we're on that hike. But I think it might be better just to kind of have an overview of all of them and then just go and just feel what is right for you.
Right.
And then experiment, and then if you find one that you really like, as you mentioned this morning, we were talking about this as a possible interview, I like the word you said, getting absorbed into your object.
Yeah, where you get this is staring at the fire. An evening fire is hours go by, you don't even know. You're just there. You lose track of time. Same on the edge of a river, watching the river, sitting on the edge of the river and watching. I did that, for endless days on the Birkenhead River. I had a visit from Ajahn Virian, one of the very, very senior monks in the forest tradition. He was the attendant of Ajahn Mun.
Mm.
And he came up, he was in his 80s probably when he came up for a little visit to the shack. He just arrived for a little time. We had a little talk, and we were standing on the edge of the river, and he was pointing at the river and saying, this is, you can use this.
Mm. So
they were doing, he's fully aware in the forest. He's spending his early years all in the forest about the nature, the magic of nature, magic of these primary elements, how they can bring you into a timeless experience. And out of that quiet pops realizations. So you don't have to really try. In fact, you can't really try. You just surrender to the quiet of the experience, or the serenity of the experience, leaning against a big boulder in the sun, looking over a valley or near the water. Don't try to do anything, just enjoy the magic of it. And out of that, without trying, that's when deeper realizations swell up. So the Buddha talks about this. One who has samadhi, and samadhi is just this serenity experience where all of the irritability and greed and everything has subsided, and you're feeling very content and free. Out of that naturally rises and swells wisdom. So we have to, but you can't just force it, otherwise you disturb the serenity. So you allow that serenity to just take place without expectation, without trying. And then at the deeper level of the mind, somehow it's been processing, but it's been looking for an opportunity to hand up an idea or a message. But because we talk all the time to ourselves, we don't have time to hear it. But it's only when we get silent that the mind can get a word in edgewise, into our consciousness that is not available there when you're skating on the surface. So that you just trust the healing quality of nature and the elements, and also that you have been exposed to Dhamma for decades now, and it's all in there. It's all been churning. But what it needs is just the noise to cease in order for the deeper wisdom to spring up. So all we do, and of course this is very pleasurable. This is exquisitely pleasant. That's why people can't wait to get away from their fancy apartment back into the woods, There is nothing you can compare to that quality of being. No social experience can rival that. You can't get it through any other means than the peace of mixing in nature. But it's also a springboard to wisdom, deeper realizations about things.
You're talking about how people want to get out there. It's like all of the hikes that Blake and I will do, if the conditions are right, is they've already been booked out 6 months in advance.
Yeah, and also, of course, some people bring the wrong attitude into nature as well. Or they're on this mission, they got to accomplish so many miles and get to this point and that point, as if there were, where are you going really? So that's the idea of the sauntering. Thoreau uses that word, and he analyzes it back to the French Saunter, which means to go to the Holy Land. That to saunter is to go on a pilgrimage to holiness. The Holy Land is just a simile for the internal experience, the holy experience. And so we want to savor every step of the way. The whole point is it's not to get there fast,
Right.
but it's in the pilgrimage. The Holy Land is in the journey. Every step of the journey is the Holy Land. And eventually when you arrive there, it's only how you conducted the journey to that determines whether you actually arrive at that destination of the Holy Land. Because always, as the Buddha says, you can go to all kinds of shrines and places, but they're not the refuge. The refuge is in understanding, and understanding is not a destination. It's in arriving at being, in this equanimity of being, in this perfect balance of being, having enough now. This is enough now. It's not somewhere else, you know.
Yeah. I like it. He in that essay he says breaks it down in two different ways. One is wandering to the Holy Lands, but it's also sans not land. So one who's without home, which is a bhikkhu.
Yes. Yeah, all these words, when we plumb the history of them, especially Pali words, Sanskrit words, European languages, they all actually have common root, some sort of primary language that all of them evolved from. And the roots are, the little hints are still there in the roots of the words. Yeah.
Father Michaels, when we were talking about this walk, he sent me a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, which was, he said, "Some people say that walking on water is a miracle." He says, "I think walking on the earth in peace is a miracle."
Yeah. Walking in peace is the miracle wherever you walk, whether it's on land. I mean, after all, in the modern times, we all know what water skiing is. I actually used to water ski.
Barefoot.
Well, not water ski, not barefoot, but I never got to that stage. But and you'll find quickly that it is, the first time it's quite exciting and so forth, but it really is not much to write home about. Same as the experience of flying. Everybody being in a plane, it's just, I'd rather not. This is good enough sitting here. The descriptions of flying in the Buddhist texts, the monk is always cross-legged in his flight, so he's not flapping his wings. It's an inner flight, and buoyancy of being is a feature of the mind. The only way to fly is through the development of consciousness. So it's really a state of consciousness. All of those kind of metaphysical descriptions of engaging with the elements, the primary elements of water, like doing something is walking on water or flying through the air, are only accomplished by samadhi. And so that's the clue, that this is a samadhi experience. And when it isn't a samadhi experience, when you can water ski or even parachute or something like this, if it's not a samadhi experience, it's just another little excitement, but not meaningful. But if you can be light as a feather, buoyant because of the serenity and ease of your mind, then that is the accomplishment of that primary element. That's where they all meet. The elements meet in consciousness. As we talk today, this is an incredible day to be here in the elements. We got the sun. It's +7, Celsius, and there's a slight breeze, but the sun, the radiant heat from the sun, is exquisitely warm on our shaved heads, and there's 3 or 4 feet of snow, all beautifully sparkling, and at the same time the shadows and so forth. The freshness of the air. There's nothing around here for 30 miles. Just the pine. Pine is coming out because of the sun on it. Yeah, it's quite an exquisite day. Because this is the Opposita, so our heads were shaved yesterday, and you can feel both the sun, the fire element, and the wind on it at the same time. In a beautiful, we're very sensitive to that. Yeah.
So any last pieces of advice to Blake and I?
I think just to trust yourselves, don't interfere with the process by trying too hard or being too analytical. Just allow that, like the song of nature, to just wash over you. Try not to make too many firm plans about where you're going to get, but allow yourselves sometimes to just lean against the rocks and smile into the sun, for hours.
Right.
Yeah, just absorb it that way.
Yep.
Unhurried.
All right. Thank you, Ajahn, for taking the time.
It was a nice... I wouldn't have sat out here if this hadn't taken place, so it's a good thing. I need some vitamin D.